So welcome everyone to the third Global Class Growth Stories. We're excited to have Kathryn Hymes, previously the product leader, international product leader at Slack, with us today. Very, very excited to have you on the call today, Kathryn, to come and share with us how to select and prioritize markets as you scale internationally. My name is Klaus, obviously. I'm the co-author of Global Class, a forthcoming book that's coming out in the third week of August. So keep an eye out for that. And I'm here with McDaniel, my co-author as well. Aaron, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Klaus. McDaniel, definitely excited about our book, but particularly excited about having Kathryn on today. And Kathryn, thank you for being such a great supporter of Global Class and the next generation of interpreneurs, very globally minded, culturally conscious business people who are really the catalyst behind companies that are creating global scale. And so just a little bit about Kathryn's background. So she has some incredible experiences. She has a couple degrees from Stanford University, Master in Linguistics, Master of Science in Computational and Applied Math, also a degree in Mathematics, minor in Linguistics from UCLA. She has experience working at Baidu in China, which sort of was a formative experience that we've talked to her about that sort of showed her the world of global business. She also is a Fulbright scholar, was a computational linguist and worked in a number of projects and product at Facebook. Also was basically the lead of Nextdoor's international expansion, and then went on to do something similar as Klaus had mentioned, head of international product expansion at Slack. She also has her own gaming company, Thorny Games, and also is an advisor for companies like Airtable. So we're very excited to have a conversation with you, get some of your insights, Kathryn, and then answer questions that come from our attendees later on. So we'll turn it over to you.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for the introduction. And I have to mention that I have my cat right here who's likely to show up during this webinar. So it is a necessity that I tell you his name, which is Bon Bon.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, in the Zoom world, it is only polite. Great. Well, I figured I would start by just sharing some slides. So let me do that. Hopefully you can see these.
Yep, we can see them.
Great. I'm going to put this in slideshow mode. Can you see this now? Great.
Yes.
So one thing that I think is a big part of my perspective on international expansion, both in terms of market selection, building for the world, and things like it, which I'm sure we'll get into in terms of the details later on, but a fundamental part of my perspective on this is just being a product manager. And so I think about global expansion of technology through the lens of product and how it serves people. And in particular, I think about international product development as a form of access, building for different kinds of folks, taking something that has in a piece of technology that has in it a set of baked in assumptions by the builders, by necessity, but that need to be extended, evolved in light of addressing new markets, new people. And so international product development is really when you think about building something that is considerate for different kinds of people, culture, and language. What I find that this does as a product person is that it opens up a lot of very basic fundamental questions about who you're serving in the world and what your technology is trying to do for them, how it's trying to improve their lives. So most recently, I was at a company called Slack that is really thinking about how to enable new forms of workplace collaboration, thinking about what is a way to facilitate, make more efficient knowledge work. And one of these kind of fundamental questions you can think about from the lens of the product for Slack is, what does work look like in different places around the world? And so I thought that I would take you on a small tour of different perspectives that we found at Slack by actually going out into the world and talking to people. First here, I'm taking you to Tokyo. Slack in Japan was an early success even before product localization had happened. There was some amount of product market fit. And that is surprising when you think about how sometimes it can be an uphill battle to actually find product market fit in Japan for technology that is built outside of it. There are some basic questions that we had as people working at Slack in terms of trying to better understand what Slack was enabling for folks who were working at technology companies in Tokyo and places throughout Japan. And through going to visiting these companies, having a series of focus groups. Here you're looking at a set of young people that are talking around a table in a focus group that we orchestrated late at night somewhere in Tokyo. We found people really citing the fact that Slack was a piece of technology that was enabling them to communicate in a new way in the workplace. And there's a lot of existing social convention around how email is used, around the etiquette for face-to-face communication. But where Slack in part was finding traction was in allowing people to be more casual, to use emoji, to be more efficient in the way that they talk to one another at work. And so among the suite of things that Slack does, knowing that it is enabling this particular kind of human interaction in the context of work in Japan was a powerful insight into why there was some degree of market fit ahead of localization. And it was something that we could lean into when thinking about how best to evolve and serve that market going forward. Here's another example from a trip to Bangalore. This is a picture of traffic, which is close to my heart as someone who grew up in Los Angeles, California, and spends much of her time in traffic. But there is also a lot of commuting that happens in Bangalore. And among many other things that we found in talking to people there, it became really clear that mobile is a fundamental platform for doing knowledge work. This was a quick snap when I was in traffic, but you can see that the gentleman on the back of this bike is actually holding two phones and probably doing an operation on them in the same, maybe responding to something at work, maybe, responding to an email, could be responding to a Slack message. This is something that I already do on my commute to work, but we had many, many examples of knowledge work that was just happening in the field. That was people not necessarily at a desk, not necessarily at a desktop, but that was critically engaging in what Slack offered in particular in terms of workplace collaboration. And so understanding that this was a basic interaction for work meant that we needed to think about how to prioritize mobile use cases. And then finally, this is a picture from a meeting that we had at Nubank, which is a digital bank headquartered in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And this was a great example of going out into the world and really learning how a company is using Slack in ways that were just deeply informative to us about how we think about using it too. Nubank was using Slack for internal communication in new and interesting ways. We originally had gathered with a set of people to interview them about their basic usage and needs and more fundamental questions about how work was happening. But by the end of it, we were getting tips on how to use Slack better ourselves. And so it was a great example of just how when you release a product out into the world, people will evolve it in unexpected ways. And even as the builders of the product, you need to be deeply receptive and enthusiastic about learning how it's useful to people and then be able to take those insights back to HQ. So this is just a small slice of different travel snapshots that show you what international product development has shown me over a career at this point, which is just that you are opening up deep technical and social questions when you build for the world about who technology is for, who it serves, and how it needs to evolve in order to meet their needs.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kathryn. So what we'd love to do is welcome everyone to ask any questions that you may have. While you are thinking about questions you have, I'll start with one, Kathryn. So I think, and this is probably the question that people who are expanding internationally and working on product probably ask themselves every day. You talked about different examples and different methods when it comes to actually discovering localizations that might be needed. The core question would be, when do you localize and when do you not? Because every time that happens, you're adding complexity, you're taking resources, if it's a software product, engineering resources to build those changes. So do you have any frameworks or thoughts or anything around making those decisions on a regular basis, whether certain new feature would be needed or something that the existing product would be changed to fit for that market?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think about first in terms of what is the product availability in different markets around the world today. For some products and things that I've worked on, when you don't localize, the product is completely unavailable, right? So I worked at a company called Nextdoor that is about social networks and fundamentally relies on location data and neighborhood data to be in place in order for it to offer what is this neighborhood social network. And so for markets that it hasn't launched in, it is completely unavailable. Whereas for a service like Slack, Slack is available everywhere around the world in English, in the existing capabilities of the product today, but in some markets there are additional levels of localization support. And so when it comes to thinking about, at least being honest about just what fundamental availability of the product is, it tells you just who are the people that can use it in different degrees. And it helps to be more specific about what your TAM is at that point as a product. And so when I think about trade-offs for investment, one, there's a conversation at the highest level about what markets are contributing fundamentally to the business health in terms of sales growth, in terms of user growth, in terms of what it means to be a world-class business when you're aspiring to that. And different kinds of technology and businesses will have different emphasis in different places around the world. And so being clear about those kinds of conversations, which often come from a strategic and opportunistic point of view, looking at things like TAM, looking at things like early signs of growth if you already have availability, and then being more rigorous with the framework about what it means to offer different kinds of international localization support for different tiers of priority. So in one market, it may mean that you localize in language and in currency support, but it doesn't make sense to do feature level localization. In another, it may mean that you absolutely need to do feature localization in order to gain traction there. But it's based on a more global conversation about what is important for the business at the highest level.
Awesome. That is great insight. Thank you. So anyone else have any of their questions or topics that they maybe want to delve into? If you can feel free to raise your hand and we'll make sure to give you the speaking rights to be able to do so, or you can type it into the Q&A box and we'd be happy to answer it that way as well.
Maybe in the meantime, while we're waiting for questions to come in, you talked about 3 different locations, Kathryn, right? And it can really be hard to uncover insights in new markets where culture is very different, right? I guess my question to you is, how did you approach these things differently in Japan compared to Brazil? Did you have any different types of formats to do this discovery with these roundtable sessions? Because, for example, Japanese people are not as fast as open at opening up, right? So how did you guys sort of unlock these things in those conversations to get insights that are critical for your, ability to, really address the need of local users and localize the product to scale in those markets?
Yeah, great question. I think that each of these trips were planned in partnership with research teams at Slack. And so there were really thoughtful researchers that went into thinking about how to approach different sorts of customers, non-customers, people, different kinds of companies, and then provide a context where people could be honest with us. And one fundamental part of that was partnering with local support. So in each of these markets that we went into, we would have local partners that helped with translation, that helped with introductions, that helped navigate some of these basic questions around how to frame things, how to understand what the insights that we were getting were, and how to put them in context of our own understanding, which, and our own expertise, which was in our own business. And so actually having simultaneous translation for, the two-way mirror conversations that we would have in Japan, going to companies that were not using Slack, but that we had been introduced to as being fundamental players of a particular sort within the Japanese business ecosystem that would give us insight into what are some of the concerns with people who may never be customers or who wouldn't be customers in the near term. I think that each of these ended up being really important ways of thinking about what are the kinds of things you ask different sorts of people, right? I'm going to ask someone something very different if I know that they already are using Slack and if they're an early adopter versus if, they still fundamentally, use face-to-face communication. They're, focused on a different industry. Slack is something that isn't something that ultimately is, the first priority for them in that moment. And I think that local partnership is so critical. The other thing I would say is actually going out into the field to where people are and where they work is a really powerful way to gain insights. So there is the focus groups where you bring people together, you ask them questions. There are, intercepts, you stop people, in different places on the street. At some point we went to a conference in Tokyo that was work related and were able to ask people some questions there. But really, going to workplaces, seeing the way that people are collaborating, how situations are set up was some of and like tapping into the energy of work within an office, and then seeing how the different software that's available plays into their work interactions was the highest leverage thing that we could do. And when you ask people questions about their work by seeing them work, you get different kinds of insights.
Awesome. So we have a couple questions that came in. So from an anonymous attendee. So in some instances, we may be defining our products, apps, services in a particular way, but our target customers use it in a different way. So how do we manage product development with this dissonance?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've seen this come up many times. And I think that there needs to be clarity about where you can spend limited resources that you have at HQ. And there are many, many ways that people can use a product, and it's exciting and illuminating to see them. But having the clarity of focus is so powerful at headquarters, and then being able to communicate that to other people and to customers so that they understand that if they are using a product in a way that isn't going to be the primary investment at HQ or with the way that your company views the product, then at least they understand that disconnect. One, I think, straightforward example for this from Slack is Slack is a work-focused product, but many people do use Slack for other kinds of community collaboration. So many folks would talk to us about the particular use cases that they had in thinking about what it is to use Slack for a conference or for a social network of professionals, and so on and so forth. And these are existing use cases within Slack, but when you think about what it would mean to build Slack for community groups, it's a very different product, and they're very different kinds of trade-offs that you would make in supporting that product than in building Slack as a work collaboration tool. So being really clear about where you invest and how you see yourself, and then communicating that to customers, I think is really important. At the same time, being open to different kinds of use cases that are emergent, I think is also a responsibility of the people who are building it, because you only know, you have your limited view of the world, and you can discover something that is amazing, and that if it's already proving useful to a set of people, it may be useful to a much broader set of people. So this idea of use cases that may be additive to what is the core mission of the product versus other use cases that are distracting.
Yeah, so that's one thing we talk about in the terms of, we refer to it as guardrails for what can and can't change, what the focus is. And I think you're keen in on one of the hardest things. It's, that's where the art meets the science. It's like, when is it right to expand things for that new use case, like you're saying, or when is it best to focus on things? So definitely a challenge. There's another anonymous attendee question, might be from the same person, but it says, for a company with significantly fewer resources than Slack, maybe 150 employees total, what are some research tactics that are in reach and hugely beneficial to validate assumptions? So, what are the top things to do if you don't have as much resource?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. One, in terms of data collection, there's so much data that you can collect about different places around the world. But I have found that it is incredibly illuminating to really look deeply at what competitors and local competitors do, and to understand how that ends up framing the conversation within a market. So of all of the data that I might look at, actually understanding what is the investment that competitors have made within a space, and even looking at competitors more broadly than who you think your competitors are, but where are other use cases in technology or outside of technology that are addressing a similar need, and what can you learn from where they have invested and where they found traction. That's something that you can gather just through basic insights of looking at websites, data collection, and that can tell you a lot. The other thing I would say is that there is so much access that's available in talking to customers directly, and it is amazing how little that can happen at times. It's really just a phone call that you can set up, and with a willing customer or a potential customer, walk through how your product is serving them and where it is failing them. And you can do that at scale. You can do that with different members of the business. It is some of the most energizing and humbling, bits of data that you can do. There is, that you need to be careful about not over-indexing on just what a small number of people are telling you directly, but getting directional feedback about what is working about your product and what is an opportunity to evolve, I think is really powerful and is just a Zoom call away.
You keyed into to a topic that we talk a lot about in the book Global Class, is identifying key questions to ask to customers to understand how that product resonates to them. What were some of the questions that you asked to kind of identify patterns for you as you were looking to scale into those markets?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I think that it really, that's a big and broad question. And
Right.
So those questions can really change depending on the market, as well as the product, as well as the particular instance of what you're
100%.
looking for.
Right.
But I would say, again, coming back to the product and to what to looking at something through the eyes of product development, it is like fundamentally asking yourself and thinking about how this product is fitting into someone's life, and like and what in particular it's trying to help them with. And so when it comes to thinking about, let's say, a Zoom call that is relatively low investment for both people, but that can give you signal into how you can improve, thinking or asking people to just work in front of you, to do these basic tasks beyond an eye for usability, but really trying to look at it from the perspective of someone who is managing perhaps like a bunch of notifications that are coming in, and you see that they're at a laptop, and then their child comes in, and you can appreciate just in that moment what work looks like, at least from the context of Slack, and it will give you a very visceral view of how you are fitting into that particular corner of their life.
Absolutely, that visual part is so important to truly translate what's happening. We had another question that came in from attendees. So how do you prioritize the needs of new markets versus current? Can you give us an idea of how your expansion team was set up in the years Slack had incredible growth?
Yeah, this is a great question, and one that I know that Aaron and Klaus and I have talked about at great length. And I think that there is the unhappy path that we've talked about, where you can get a lot of enthusiasm and investment in a new market at launch, and then be distracted by other things or new opportunities, or have a different focus. And so then you go down the anti-pattern of launch and leave, is what we had called it. And I think that this idea of prioritizing the needs of new markets versus current is directly asking how to avoid that. I think that one, it's actually framing the problem as being more than a launch. And I think some of the language that we use in thinking about international expansion can unfortunately lean into these bad habits, where you think about what it is to get a market to a certain place and then to change attention and to go somewhere. And what it really should be is thinking about like, how does your investment in a market evolve, and then what does sustainability look like when you get to that point. Each market will have a different story depending on its relative priority to the business, how you set it up. When Slack, for example, first launched in Japan, it was even using the word launch is a misnomer there, in the sense that there were a lot of steps that happened along the way. First people using the product unlocalized as it was available, and doing everything they could to localize and build on top of it. Then it was offering different portions of localization support, be it through a localized help center or direct features that were supporting new use cases, actually offering full localization ahead of, at the same time, building out a local sales team, hiring a country manager who then ultimately was building a team that was focused on that market, that could directly build these relationships with customers and think about expansion. And so the idea of having this constantly moving sort of target, and realizing that you aren't just building for a moment, but for sustainability, and then hiring in the right way, that you are setting up systems that can be sustainable on their own, and then plug into the broader business, which then can look at a different set of customers that it's actively serving all of the time. I think from the perspective of someone who works more directly in international product development or global expansion, I still won't have the same level of attention and focus on any one of those places always. But it also means that it behooves someone in that position to help facilitate the systems to be in place so that they can run on their own. And again, the story will be different depending on the priority of a market to the business as a whole. For example, you may say that like the investment that we have in a current market is really targeted towards just enabling language localization so that people can come to it. It can find a different level of attraction before it becomes a place where there's active sales that are happening, or a local regional sales team. And sustainability in that perspective and how you invest will be really different.
That's some great points. I remember you sharing with us just one of the points you said earlier in your answer. In Japan, independent of Slack and you, people had created books for how to translate different things of Slack into Japanese so they could use it more easily with kind of almost made screenshots of the software. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Lots of great questions from attendees. So this one's from Robin. Would love to hear more about other anti-patterns that you noticed. You were talking about that a little bit.
Yeah, so many with international. I would say that, and that's not a commentary on Slack in particular. It's just everywhere. I find that international, and I've talked about this with other folks that work in there, is just a way to kick up all of these fundamental questions about the business that otherwise haven't been directly addressed, but when you, or they may be addressed, but not as rigorously as they need to in order to scale. And it just forces a lot of questions to happen, which I think is a really useful thing in the maturity of a business, but it can be painful at times too. And in terms of other anti-patterns, I've seen one, it's fundamentally not being aligned on the level of investment for international and what it will take at different levels of the business and how that can create disconnect. I think that you really need buy-in from the executive level and from the board to do international well. And companies that I have talked to and that I've seen that try and kind of shortchange it or put it to the side often regret it, especially when they don't have that clarity of priority from the top. So that's one anti-pattern. The other, another that comes to mind is around when there isn't the level of communication and agreement across the executive level of a business to understand what different kinds of investments are needed in order to successfully either launch or sustain a market. And there's this lopsidedness that you can find at times where maybe the sales organization or a marketing organization or a product organization will have different thoughts and opinions and priorities assigned towards building out different goals that serve different markets, different needs, different customer segments, but that when you look at them from the highest level, they don't add up to something that feels coherent. They're at odds with each other. And I've seen I'd say the greatest strife come when you realize that it's not computing in the way that you thought it would. And so the sooner that you can have those kinds of questions where you aren't overly siloed within a particular function, you're not just thinking about go-to-market, you're not just thinking about product or just thinking about sales, but instead thinking more broadly about the business and its offerings in a particular market. And the better that you have that conversation, it doesn't mean you always choose the full suite of things that one ought to do. It doesn't mean that you don't do things that aren't lopsided, but at least you're going into those markets, those questions with eyes open.
That's awesome. I have to say also, you keyed in onto a couple use cases where we created our tool, the localization premium analysis, which is kind of this spider chart. And two of the core purposes were around these scenarios you talked about, where one, you're looking for different patterns for what worked in one market that then might be able to translate to other markets to be able to control some of the complexity. And the other part, which is huge, is the fact that a lot of leaders within a business will have a very myopic view of what expansion means and what should be focused on, depending on if they're on a product team or on the sales team or on the legal side. And so appreciate you giving real world applicability to that. I think we have one more question, but before that, I did want to ask about the earlier stages when you're expanding into new markets. So we talk about different types of culture, and one of the types that we're seeing emerging is what we label as community culture. And so these are common sets of beliefs and behaviors and otherwise of of niche groups that go beyond national borders. And so a story we like to tell is one we heard from a former Airbnb exec, where she talked about how marathon runners were early adopters for them in different markets, and they would use that common language, that common set of use cases, that common set of beliefs and core values that marathon runners had across national borders to gain entry into new markets. Did you find that concept useful? What was that for Slack? Was a certain type of company or a certain type of employee at a certain company? Would love to understand that a little better.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting with marathon runners, Airbnb. For Slack, it was people building things, finding people who actively are building things, but primarily building with technical tools. So people who Slack had the most stark and immediate product market fit among technical teams, both in the US and in other places abroad. And that was useful to see because there is a shared language and a shared culture. But also, I think that Slack at some point became emblematic of along with a suite of other tools for a particular, let's say, ethos of how to work, of working in a technical setting that was coming out of an era within Silicon Valley. So if you wanted to, let's say, key into working in the style of what you felt like was a Silicon Valley company within a particular era, some people in different places around the world would tell us that they would view Slack as being emblematic of a more disruptive, knowledge worker forward way of working. And then the adoption of it within their company was signaling to everyone else and their employees within it that, hey, we're working in a new, innovative way that isn't as reliant on email, that is asynchronous, that is using our tools in a way that that is new, but that will hopefully enable us to do new and better things. And so that early traction with technical teams was true in many places, and knowledge work can look different in some cases, and in many cases it looks the same. So we'd go into different companies in Bangalore, in Brazil, in Japan, and it could have been down the street in San Francisco. And then in other places that we went, things were really different. And the truth is that that's true of the US too. There's many places that you go, and even just like the building software culture is really different, depending on the company, its size, its history, its relative, conservativeness, acceptance of new tools and things like it, or wanting more flat, transparent communication. So there are interesting parallels that you find among, different groups within the US, and where there, were different kinds of, let's say, cultural friction or traction with Slack versus other places around the world that were more similar in terms of its knowledge work culture, where Slack was an easier fit.
Awesome. Another Q&A question came through. Do you mind sharing the eureka or aha moment of Slack? So when do you think you had everything an app should have to gain the traction you were hoping to have?
Yeah, I think as a product person, you're just forever critical. And so I don't have a single moment where I can say that, it reached its pinnacle in any way. And in fact, you just become aware of the ways that something is helpful to people, but is falling short. And I think that when you carry that with you, it adds a level of urgency to your work, which I appreciate. I think for Slack, though, seeing it as a fundamental way that people were really relying on in order to do their jobs in really different kinds of work was very energizing to me. So I remember being in Bangalore and visiting what was an early adopter of Slack at the time, one of their biggest hotel services, but understanding that people within these hotels, working behind the desk, out in the field, were actively using Slack on their mobile phones in order to connect with HQ, their own HQ, but also just to fundamentally do their job. And that was knowledge work. It was out and about. It was mobile. It was, commuting, from, where their families may live on the weekends to where they live in the city during the week. And Slack was something they're relying on to get their work done. And just to see that, that trust, but also just the reliance on Slack as an essential tool was something that really stuck with me and always sticks with me.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's really exciting to see, this when your product is not just applicable for one market, but really has global appeal and can, in different ways and different use cases and different framing, still solve problems for people.
Yeah, and I think that one thing that we've talked about before, Aaron and Klaus, is that one, that's such an energizing moment, but also it's just an opportunity to be able to take that enthusiasm back to the local team, the team in the company that is actively building your product, and show them the impact, show them the opportunity, and to just really make it real and human. I've never found at Slack we use this. We use Slack itself to build Slack, and one of the things that we did when we would go out into the field is create a separate Slack channel that we then would write to almost as like a field diary. So everyone that was in the field would actively put their latest insights. We'd put videos. We'd put we'd put interviews and bits of information in the Slack channel, and it was probably the most popular thing at the company. Like in the weeks that it was active, had incredible penetration within the company, but also just it was deeply motivating for a lot of people, and it became this moment internally to feel like that we are serving a new part of the world. Like we do have new people that we're thinking about and that need to be considered, and that just has so many ricochet effects for the kinds of questions that people ask in the future. Again, for who they internalize in terms of like how they're building, who they're building for, and I think that it changes the way that the business sees itself.
Yeah, that field diary concept is awesome. And I mean, one thing we talk about is how it's important that it's not just one person or a small group that's sort of doing this off to the side. And when you expose everybody to that, where they can tap in the information, it is much more powerful. And I imagine, to the points you were talking about earlier about building a coalition of support and getting people to understand the nuances of markets, having that open communication can be really helpful in doing that, so people can sort of plug into the whole process.
Yeah.
So we intended for the session actually to be pretty brief, but there have been so many questions, which is awesome. And thank you for all of the wonderful insights, Kathryn. Let's take one more from the audience. So as Slack entered new markets, did it start by launching one market at a time and then evolve into launching multiple markets at once? Were there distinct stages in expansion this way? Maybe talk a little bit about that journey.
Yeah. I think entering new markets, again, will mean different things at different points. Slack had opened up, Slack was a multi-regional company even before I came into it, and that it had HQs in different places throughout the world. And that gave it, a base in Canada, in Australia, and then many new markets many new offices were opened. But when it came to really thinking about launching the first non-English focused market, and it was a wave of markets that we chose to do at once. So the first set of markets were France, Germany, and then Spanish-speaking communities, so Spain, as well as Japan, all at once. And part of that, I would say, is thinking about it from the perspective of the investment of product and engineering to get the product ready to support the features, use cases, languages in those markets. And then there were different kinds of readiness when it came to events, marketing, and go-to-market activities overall that didn't all happen at a particular moment, but that were all announced together as part of Slack's first user-focused conference called Frontiers. And so tackling a set of markets altogether had the benefit of not over-indexing on any one market to begin with. You're immediately thinking about scale. when you think about global expansion in that way. Also, not only doing markets within a particular region makes you consider really different kinds of use cases that can come up in different parts of the world. And then going forward, the level of investment and how you think about like your first steps of entry into a market. Sometimes they were product first, in that there was localization support. Sometimes it was sales first. Sometimes it was opening an office and getting an operational center or having support in a particular language. But this idea of, at least in the first concerted effort about thinking about Slack launching internationally, doing it with a suite of target markets, I think helped everyone be more rigorous, even though it took a lot more time and energy than probably just one would have.
Awesome. Well, so many fantastic insights you've shared. I was taking a bunch of notes from patterns and anti-patterns to the field diary to, like you're saying, not over-indexing for one market, but building in a way that you're considering global, to the important questions to answer, and on and on. So thank you so much. This has been a masterclass of insights, and really appreciate you sharing your experience and answering questions, Kathryn. Thank you for your time.
It's always so fun to talk with you, and I'm a great way to spend my morning.
Yeah. We really appreciate your time, Kathryn. And there's one quote, at least one thing that was particularly quotable, is using the word launch as a misnomer. I think that was really interesting. So expect that one on social media. And just want to also thank you on behalf of the team and also the people attending this call, because the goal of doing these series is to make international expansion a shared experience, not a solitary one. Because what we found in our research, it happens in silos, and people in the expansion communities do not connect often together. So thank you for being a part of that mission and goal for the organization. And we look forward to many more sessions where we bring in international leaders to come in and share their experiences. So Kathryn, this, to Aaron's point, has been a masterclass, and we look forward to doing many more of these in the future together with you and Robin Larson on the call, hopefully at some point, and Ramsey Pryor and all the other great expansion leaders that we know. And thank you for attending today's call. We look forward to again to see you guys in the future.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thank you, everybody.